Welcome to today's video on family. I'm going to give a quick overview, and I'm using this book, The Expanding Family Life Cycle, from Monica McGoldrick, Nadia Petro, and Betty Carter. All three of them are very famous feminist, social justice activist kind of therapists. And this book, I think, is in its fifth edition, maybe even its sixth edition right now. So it's kind of a classic in family counseling. And that's part of why I chose it. When we first opened this book, there's a wonderful diagram here that I encourage everyone to spend a lot of time reflecting on. We've done a video, Carlene, Tuba, and I, we've done a video on intersectionality, we've done on rural dynamics, we've done it on noticing of ethnocultural identity pegs, and so on. So what they've done in this diagram, I would recommend if you're doing family counseling or anything that could connect with family counseling, like individual counseling, which is often quite like family counseling. You're counseling about the family when you're doing individual work sometimes. This diagram would be a great thing to consider photocopying and putting just above your desk. So I'm going to go through some of the basic ideas in it. I'm not going to read you the entire diagram, but what they have is concentric circles, and in the center, of course, we have the individual, reflecting on issues like age, gender, race, ethnicity, social class. We did a video on class, the life cycle stage of the individual in front of you, and life cycle stressors. Also, the social location, power and privilege, physical and psychological development and health. And we did a video on disability. We also did one on head injuries. Life skills and self-management, emotional and social competence, education, work, financial issues, language and communication skills and style, physical activities, religion, philosophical and spiritual values, the hopes and dreams of the person in front of you. What is their sense of belonging, and how do they think of all of their relationships in the community? So that's under the section in this diagram of the individual, body, mind, and spirit. Then the next zone they have over here is the family itself. And then we reflect upon the family life cycle stage. So let's say the young couple, the older married couple, the elder couple, at different stages in relationship of a family. There's a significance between being married for 1 year, being married for 51 years, right? There's going to be different challenges and successes that the couple will have. Family membership in the household structure, emotional and relational patterns, boundaries, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Communication styles, triangles, secrets, myths, legacies, themes, loss and trauma of the family, strengths and vulnerabilities or dysfunctions, values, beliefs, rituals, and practices. So they've put that at the bottom of this diagram, individual stuff, and then the family itself. When I would be working with a family, I would say to the couple, let's say in front of me, if it was you and your partner, in our first sessions, if my role was to be a family counselor, I would say to the individuals, the reason I am here is you have entrusted me with your relationship. So I'm not here for you or your spouse or each of your kids. I am here for the space between of all of it. I am here to look at the marital relationship with each of you. I am kind of positioning myself, let's say, as the guardian or the advocate or the explorer with the marriage itself. So, of course, we're going to do the individual work maybe here under this quadrant of this diagram. But my role is not to be on your side or on the other person's side. Because sometimes in a family counseling session, that's what people are wanting. The one spouse will be, I want you to say that I'm right, that he or she should do the things I say. No, I'm not here to say anybody's right or wrong. I'm here to encourage you to be your best selves for the sake of the relationship. And sometimes if you have a relationship and you reflect on those two zones, often each person has stuff that they may need to go and do on their own with an individual counselor, a different counselor. That we had said we would touch at least on boundaries in this video or in a future video, but boundaries are very, very important to right away establish when you're the counselor on behalf of or with a family. Because each person will try and pull you in, and they may shift who's going to pull you in. One day it's this person, the other day it's that person. Let's say it's a mom and her kid, right? The kid is like, my mom expects too much of me. My mom is always following me. My mom is bossy. And the mom is, my kid is disobedient. My kid is unruly. My kid never listens to me. And my task is to say, I believe in both of you. I believe in the love between a parent and a child and a parent. I compliment both of you that you've shown up today. I am so invested in helping each of you figure out this relationship. Right? So I'm there for that other space, not you, not you. If there's 10 people in the family, right? I am here for the 10ness of it, the wholeness. Of course, there'd be different ways for therapists to think of this, or counselors or social workers, but that's how I personally think of what my role is in family counseling, right? If the family becomes even just 2 people, sometimes I might see one spouse for 2 sessions and then see the other spouse for 2 sessions. But even when I'm alone with the spouse, I'm still there as an advocate for the love and the hope of the relationship. If at some point it becomes impossible for the relationship to continue, so I had maybe 3 or 4 lesbian couples that I worked with where we had that kind of dynamic. They came in to talk at first about conflicts and disharmonies and dissatisfactions and so on, and I was there as the advocate for the relationship, for the platform of love that they were sharing. If at some point that changed, if one person said, I'm out of this relationship, then of course my role changes. So in effect, I get fired or dishired as the advocate for the family, and I may, through discussion of this new boundary, this new relationship, I might be with only one partner now, talking about grief and loss and aloneness and how that relationship has shaped them and what they may wish to do in preparedness for some future relationship and so on. But we would discuss that as a new boundary, as a new dynamic of what we're going to do, right? So that these are things that the onus has to be on the social working person to clarify, because the client may not know how to really talk about stuff like that. That may not be their wisdom, right? So just to make sure I've said that very clearly, always the idea of boundaries is on the counselor to talk about the boundaries, what can and can't happen in this hour we have together, or hour and a half, how often we will meet, what we can and can't talk about. Of course, all the stuff about dangers. If at some point I am worried that you will hurt yourself or hurt someone else, I may bring in another person. If I may breach your confidentiality under those circumstances, being clear about the boundary of sometimes you may, depending what the agency is, if it's a child protection type agency, you may have clear lines of communication between you say things to me and I may have to say that to my supervisor or to the lawyer or to some other person. Sometimes there's other people who may be involved. The boundaries of that, the clarification of those possibilities is again on me, right? And often that's part of what you're doing in a family, is talking about boundaries with each person in the family. If I take another really common one that I gave you the example of the mom and the daughter,
Yeah.
I had so many situations where moms would come to me. This was my 3 years in private practice, where a mom would come to me and say, my daughter doesn't listen to me, my daughter this, I'm worried about my daughter, and would be with intense love, but at the same time, what she was exploring was boundaries, right? And of course, the natural thing for all creatures is at some point the young push boundaries. That's what they do, right? Whether that's, I don't know, lions or zebras or giraffes, that's the nature of our species, is to prepare young if you've done a good job as a parent or a guardian or a mentor, you've built up their self-esteem, their courage, their intelligence, their good health, their creativity, their self-esteem. You've done all those good things. And in many of those cases that I worked with, the funny thing was the mom had been so awesome at developing her daughter's courage, self-esteem, strength, intelligence, and then she would be so surprised. Now here's my daughter, she's 15 or 16 years old, and here she is. She's intelligent, she's vocal, she's courageous, she's greedy about life, she wants to experiment and do things.
Yeah, she challenges me.
She challenges me. And so sometimes what I was doing was helping the two of them explore those things around boundaries. Because really what the mom is doing, although whatever she says in those kind of stories, assuming it's a good mom. You know, good enough mom. Maybe not, you know, Mother Teresa of mummies, but
well-intentioned.
Well-intentioned. What really is underneath all that is often the mom inside herself is fear. Something bad could happen to my daughter. Somebody could do something to my daughter, like she could get abducted, she's out at night, or worried that her daughter will get involved with drugs or alcohol, or, you know, things that are not outside the realm of imagination. Those things could happen. But so the mom is coming from a place of fear and anxiety, and also the mom is in effect in a healthy relationship. She's being dishired as mom. At some point, if you've been really good as a mom, your children will be independent and effective. They will be autonomous. That is your job. And if you've been fabulous at your job, you work yourself out of a job. If it's said differently, the other extreme is your daughter is 30 years old, she still lives at your house, she has no friends, no career goals, she's not going to school, she watches TV all day. You've kind of failed as a mom because you haven't developed, or you've been part of a failure as a mom, that she hasn't developed all her autonomy and her independence.
And all the skills that she needs to function in society, because that's so socially dictated.
Right, exactly. And so interestingly, almost all of those cases that I had, maybe 10 stories like that, where moms were pondering the daughter stuff. And then I would meet the mom individually, and then I would meet the daughter individually, and then I'd meet them together as a set and talk to them about different things. And often that was all that it was. It was for the mom to realize, you've been a really effective mom. Congratulate yourself. Give yourself a promotion, and then give yourself a vacation. Because you have been, you can now be a part-time mom, right? Your daughter may be 16, 17, 18, and to reframe it, so the mom saying, my daughter doesn't listen to me, and her room is a mess or something, and reminding the mom, one, is this worth fighting for? Right? If your daughter doesn't make her bed, I'm 60 years old, I don't make my bed. Right? I'm a good person, I function, I'm okay. It's probable for the rest of my life I won't make my bed. Nah, not a problem really, in terms of the hierarchy of things. But maybe the daughter needs to be more effective at communicating and saying, Mom, I'm going to this place at this time with these people. Please don't worry, because I'm going to be safe. I won't be alone on the road at night. The daughter just saying, I'm going tonight, maybe was leaving the mom feeling worried, right? So figuring out between the two of them what is an honorable, fair, reasonable boundary. And one of the things that I would invite people to do is reestablish, as if you just met each other in a way, as if it's a roommate, right? If you and I decided we're going to share an apartment, right? And I have my bedroom and you have your bedroom, you have no right to come in my bedroom and yell at me about not making my bed. Because I'm independent.
And I'm entitled to this space.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a boundary. And then there were other things like, but if I'm a roommate with you and I leave dishes all over the house, that's going to piss you off. I'm supposed to put the dishes in the dishwasher or wash them, right? Like some of those really practical things around boundaries and respect. Mm-hmm. And when I would reframe those relationships and say, never mind that you're related by blood, never mind you're related by law, you're two adults who share an apartment. So let's ponder that, like try and meditate on that. And what would you expect from each other if you were roommates sharing an apartment? Similarly, if we were roommates sharing an apartment, I wouldn't be able to say to you, hey, I need $50 because I need a new pair of jeans. You'd say, that's not my problem. You go get a job. Right? Mm-hmm. So also for the child to realize you can't have it both ways. You can't say, I want to be independent and free and autonomous and live my own life, but I want to be able to just get $50 whenever I want $50. No. Pick a boundary here and explore under what circumstances can we re-wiggle or rejig some of those boundaries. Mm-hmm. That's a very common one, but we're just saying, you know, I've used the example of mothers and daughters, but it could have been fathers and sons. It could be a young couple. You're figuring out those boundaries. Who's going to do the cat box cleaning, right? Oh, I thought you'd do that because they're your cats. Well, we're now a married couple, and we have these cats, so we are going to take turns at cat boxes. Or if I do the cat boxes, you do the dishes. That's it. You'd be amazed. People imagine, when you look at Hollywood, you think, oh, you know, people will come for family counseling because one person's had an affair, or the other person has set the house on fire. Or, no, what I found when I was doing private practice was the issues people would bring to me were things like, she's a pig. She's a fucking pig. She never cleans up after herself. And if people haven't dealt with those issues, eventually somebody has an affair or takes off or burns the house down maybe, but that's way out there. It's often those little small things that you think, who would argue over that? That's often what people argue about, and argue and argue and argue. And then people start losing trust in each other, losing respect and tenderness for each other, and then maybe they're not having sex anymore because one or both are really angry about, well, you didn't make supper, yeah, well, you don't do dishes, yeah, well, you don't do the cat boxes, yeah, well, you won't pick up the mail, yeah, well, you got examples that I see you smiling. It's just,
well, yeah, that and, like, we talk about it a lot in psych, so, like, there's, like, communication patterns that people have, and there was a whole lot of research on that, and how it'll start with a criticism, or, like, and then the other person will respond with, like, contempt, or defensiveness, and then, obviously, that, in turn, gets the other partner to react again, and then you just keep going. Because then, even if you manage to settle that complaint, the next time that you have a problem, it's going to start it all over again.
Right. So teaching boundaries, for example, are one of those things where people, what are the boundaries of conversation? Like, you know, it's a boundary to say, I will never swear at you. I might swear, but, you know, like, I'm so pissed off about dishes versus you're a bitch. Right? If couples can discuss those boundaries of where we will never go with our language, I will never hit you, that's a boundary, you will never hit me, I will never throw things, you will never throw things, we will never spend money outside of these realms. Like some couples, healthy couples, or a healthy mother-daughter, you know, whatever it is, will have things like, each of us, every payday, we will both put our pay in the account, and then each of us will take out $70. You have 70, I have 70. And I can spend my 70 on anything I want. But if there's $1, if taken from the middle money, I've breached a boundary. We've agreed the boundary, that's your whole paycheck, my whole paycheck, each gets 70, and I can spend that on groceries or on cat food or sparkly things for my hair, right? So all in some ways, communication skills and boundaries are really, you could think, the bread and butter of relationships.
Yeah,
all kinds.
How you interact with the other person is largely a part of your relationship, if not like the entire relationship.
Yeah.
It's an interaction with the other person.
Yeah. And the basic skill cluster, let's say 100 things in the center of, you know, what does that mean to you? How do you feel about that? How did you interpret it when I said this? What are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals?
What about this upset you?
What about this upset you? And here's one, if you want to offer something to every family member, i.e. all humans, pretty well, offering them this cluster of skills, here's it's a gift, I think, to the world to say, teach me to do it the way you wish it to be. Right? So often people know, I don't like what you just did. And the other person says, well, I didn't do it, or I did it, or I did it this, blah, 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 right? If you can then say, okay, for the next time, how would you like me to do that differently, right? So let's say a friend of mine calls and says, can we go out for dinner on Friday? And I say yes, right? And we're a couple, right? And then I come home and I tell you, oh, my friend and I are going out for dinner on Friday. And you say, well, you didn't even discuss it with me, right? Instead of getting defensive, the dream would be to say, oh, I'm sorry that happened. It was impulsive. I haven't spoken to this friend for a while. How would you like me to do it differently next time? And you could say back to me, oh, tell your friend you're excited to go for coffee with them or dinner sometime soon, but first you need to check in with your spouse. Right? So people are often way more quick to say what they didn't like and what they didn't want. So one of our roles as family counselors, or any kind of counselor, is to say, get everybody, teaching everybody in the family to say that. How would you wish me to do it different next time?
So you want there's the identification of the problem, so like what upset you, and then there's the functional portion where you're asking then what is it about that specific situation should you change for future.
So one of the aspects of that is as a habit. If you can get people to be in that habit, admitting something happened that wasn't best practice, right? So you're mad at me for something. So I want to figure out what made you mad in this story or this episode.
And not make it a personal issue where you have a problem with me, rather you have a problem with something that has happened or something that I've done, which doesn't necessarily mean you have a problem with
separating the person and the problem. Exactly. Very wise. And not for us to just do that as therapists, but to do that in a way that teaches every client how to do that. Because that skill cluster, if you can get all your clients doing that all the time, that one little gift right there will serve them in a million ways in the workplace, with their friends, not just with their spouse or their kids, but everywhere you go, that'll be a real skill. And their faces will light up and they'll feel hopeful because they'll go away and experiment with that with friendships and so on. What did that mean to you? How did you feel about that? Tell me more. Some of those what we take for granted in social work, from our intro to social work communication skills or second level communication skills. And
what do you need?
What do you need? How could I do it better next time?
Yeah.
How will I know that I've done it right?
What will it look like if you do it or whatever?
Right,
if
exactly.
You accomplish this?
Yeah, how will I know when I've made you happy? How will I know when I haven't made you happy? How can I build trust with you for you to teach me and me to teach you how to get it the way you want it to be? Sometimes these are small edits, but they harvest fabulous outcomes for our mother-daughter relationship, spousal relationship, parents with kids. And then, of course, they transfer to everywhere else in life if you know how to communicate well, right? So in here, they've got individual and a bunch of aspects we need to reflect on. Then the whole family as a meso-level group. And then on the top, going back to our diagram here, they have up here horizontal factors, and they talk about life cycle transitions, historical events, economics, and politics. And some aspects of this stuff are unpredictable, so natural disasters, accidents, illness, trauma, untimely death, unemployment, and migration. So those are let's say, more sociological variables that affect a family. Right now, to use something very current, we have, because of C-19, there's millions of people who are staying home. The whole family is home. The kids aren't in school. Mom and dad may be trying to work from home. And so you have isolation, the family may be feeling a little suffocated, stuck together for 100 days in a row, while both mom and dad might be trying to get their work done, but they are both interrupted and distracted by the kids and each other if they're not accustomed to this. And then they have this additional kind of wham of money. Many families, the one or more of the usual breadwinners is unable to work, so they have no income coming in. So that would be an example of a horizontal factor or a unpredictable natural disaster kind of situation. How will that shape each person in the family? And if we're stuck inside like this for another 4 months or 6 months, we know that a lot of family violence is going to escalate. We know that the financial troubles will have consequence for some families, including if they were already a little on the edge. It could cause breakups. Mm-hmm. It can cause homelessness. So some people who used to have just about enough money to pay all their bills, all of a sudden they don't have enough money to pay their rent, so they may have to move back in with mom or grandma, right? So those are horizontal factors. So we've got, if you can picture this cluster of individual persons, the individual variables, the family or meso-level variables, and we could say these are the macro-level variables. And how does that all play out? So I'm not going to go into every detail of that diagram, but it's a very profound diagram, and there's probably 10 other versions of that kind of an idea. This diagram and these concepts reappear throughout the whole book. And I would say especially those two clusters, let's say, of communication skills and boundaries. Those are so important for families. Communication skills and boundaries. So I'm going to skip around, and one of the things, if we go back to one of our first videos, we talked about the family has traditionally been defined by law, which was invented and then accumulated and edited and re-edited over hundreds and hundreds of years through largely white British males, elite white British males. The law in Canada was influenced by that cluster of ongoing beliefs and values and attitudes. And family by law was often orchestrated around who owns what. Is this a legitimate child or is this an illegitimate child? When someone dies, who inherits the farm or the estate? Who is legally entitled to make decisions for grandma who's in a coma? Who owns grandma, right? So law largely defined the family, and biology largely defined the family. So law had built into it racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, all that stuff. Biology is random. Whether grandma gets Alzheimer's at age 50 or at age 70, or grandma never gets Alzheimer's, is somewhat random biological stuff. Who gets MS? Who ends up with 6 kids? Who ends up with no kids? Right now we have some influences around birth control, but historically, I mean, right, until 1960 pretty much, who ended up with 12 kids before birth control was invented?
Yeah. And if you're playing Russian roulette.
Right. It was kind of chaos. So our modern family, what we're wishing is that it's more defined based on affinity and affections and alliances, right? We need to use law sometimes, and biology, of course, is in there, but as social workers, we wish to invite people, you can reconsider family based on affinities, affections, and alliances. So related to that, on page 2 of this textbook, there's something that I wanted to, earlier in the video I said, I agree with everything in this textbook. There's nothing in here that I disagree with. I found something that I remembered I disagree with. So I'll read this. It's kind of funny because it sort of proves what I was saying about biology and law. So they say here in this wonderful textbook, as a system moving through time, families are different from all other systems because they incorporate new members only by birth, adoption, commitment, or marriage, and members can only leave by death, if even by death. Whoa! Wrong answer. I would like to make it really clear. It goes on, and I'm quoting. In families by contrast, the pressures of membership with no exit available can, in the extreme, lead to severe dysfunction or even suicide. So, that's wrong. I'm sorry, I don't agree. Right? So, in stories where, let's say, like my own, where my father sexually abused me, and my mother, I would say, was colluding with that for a variety of reasons, and we did a video on colluding women. I feel my parents breached the covenant of love and positivity and wholesomeness that would have entitled them to call themselves my mom, my dad, my parents, my family. I legally changed all my names when I was about 20, and it was one of the best $600 investments of my life. It was a ritual for me of saying, I don't belong to that family. I don't belong to this patriarchal institution. I don't belong to my abuser. My life begins with me now. I am a free agent. I can make choices that are about my best interests. In families where mom or dad is homophobic and you feel your love energies are for someone of the same gender, I believe you have the right, the wholesome, intrinsic, and righteous right to walk away. There's a song about that. There's 50 ways to leave your lover or something like that. I think there's at least 50 ways to leave your family that don't involve death. You can just get on a Greyhound bus and start over somewhere.
You can walk. You can horseback ride into the sunset.
Exactly. So that seems like a small thing, but in a lot of families, when we hear these horrific stories of the wife is being abused, and someday she finds the courage and the resources to leave, and we hear the husband tracks her down and kills her and says, you will never leave me. You married me, we belong together forever, and you don't get to leave me. Right? Where did that idea ever come from? That two people could be held hostage to each other or one to the other to that level of horror and violence that is so twisted and distorted.
Like that ownership.
And in family counseling, you'll spend a lot of time with those families or individuals from families saying, you know what, you don't have to put up with this. If you're feeling damaged, hurt, diminished, depressed, crippled emotionally, if all kinds of ways of this relationship are not good for you, I don't care who you are, in what family or what religion or what anything, I personally, in my feminist values, believe it's better for everybody that people can part, right? So if, let's say, mom and dad are very homophobic and very devoted to their religion, and the religion as they interpret it is homophobic, it's better for them too that they can just say, you know, yeah, we've got a daughter or a son, and they live in Vancouver, and they've made a whole different life for themselves, and we're happy for them that they're somewhere else. And the son or daughter who is, you know, in a beautiful, healthy life as a lesbian or gay person and living a beautiful life. Everybody go do your beautiful life. It's okay to say that. I think that's okay.
Yeah, I feel like those are healthy boundaries.
Yes. But that's kind of miraculous. Some people will, we were laughing earlier that often you hear this at a funeral. Some guy who's been beating his wife for 20 years and beating his kid for 20 years, and he's a drunk and a pig and he's awful and he's a pedophile. He dies, and at the funeral everybody, George was such a good guy. He was a good father and we're going to miss him. And you think, why are they behaving this way? One, because they think, well, we have to make this public presentation to protect the reputation of the family. Plus, everybody has to show up at the funeral because blood is thicker than water. No. We can make new boundaries, new rules, new relationships that are good for everybody. If he was a bad guy doing bad things, you can walk away. And that's not necessarily with like evil and wishing him bad, right? Like because he might be in his mind, in his world, if he's a very devout traditional Muslim person or something, and he's got values and beliefs in his household, for him, with him, okay, be that. Yeah, yay, be that, right? But if his kids or his cousins or his brother or sister, I have friends who, one I'm thinking of right now, she hates her brother. She has nothing but contempt for him. Every time I see her, she tells me bad things about her brother. And I've been trying to say to her over the years, you don't have to answer the phone when he calls. She's in her 50s. If someone for 50 years, every time you talk to them, they upset you, they attempt to humiliate you, they say unkind things to you, they judge you with harshness, I don't care how much bloodline you share. Let it go. Just say to him, you have grown up with right-wing values and I'm a lefty, and bye! Yay! Send him an email every Christmas and we're done. Right? It's almost like a harm reduction strategy. Like, you don't have to keep putting your face in each other's face. Let it go. It's okay. Just let it go. Mm-hmm. No harm will come to anybody. Just let it go. This sounds so, in a way, like so obvious, but I offer you as social work students, you'll see during your career, you'll see all kinds of people who, if they could just walk away from each other and go have a good life somehow separate, their lives would be 100% better. Everyone involved. Yeah. You're nodding. Like, can you think of some stories from friends or neighbors or?
Just like personally, I don't have a relationship with my parents.
Okay.
And that's a good thing. It's good to not have a relationship because distance for us is probably the most powerful thing.
Right. And so if you leave even a tiny door and say, maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, maybe something with them will change, or maybe something with me will change. But in the interval, without wishing them harm or negativity, just bye-bye.
Yeah, I wish you well, but away from me.
Right. I wish you well, but with a good boundary between us. Right? And that is so simple, but also incredibly revolutionary. For many people, it's incredibly revolutionary.
Oh no, it took many years of therapy for that.
Well, when people are forced to be together, when they're not happy with it, that's where you end up having abuses. That's where you end up, somebody gets to their end of their line and they punch the other person, or one person does start drinking, or like they start using other strategies to cope rather than just saying, we don't have to continue this way. So it continues, far from being the one-way street that most life cycle formulations have offered us. Our lives continually spiral through multi-generational and contextual connections with those who come before us, those who go with us through life, and those who come after us. So there's still kind of, with this quote here, they're going further with what they said over here, that only death separates you. I would suggest there's lots of ways to separate, and it's a really good thing. Then they're giving some overview here of big patterns that have happened I'm 60. Carlene is?
24.
24. So in my lifetime, there's things that have happened that have made dramatic, perhaps more dramatic than any generation ever seen in the history of our species. In one lifetime, from when I was born in 1960 till today, there's more things gone on that have changed the family than in any other time in our species history. So here's some of the things that have been influencing that zone. A lower birth rate, longer life expectancy, the changing role of women, rise in unmarried motherhood, the rise in unmarried couples, increasing single-parent adoptions, increasing rainbow couples and families, increasing longevity with the implications of caretaking needs at the end of life, greater physical distance among family members, increasing work time especially for women, high divorce and remarriage rates, increasing two-paycheck marriages to the point where they are now the norm, and changing household compositions, more single-person households than ever before. So those dynamics, that's a little list, and I invite you to reflect upon them. Nothing like that has happened in the history of our species, and they haven't added these things. the invention of the birth control in 1960, IUD, birth control now that you can insert in your arm for 3 months. People, I've had my tubes tied at one point in my life so that I wouldn't be at risk anymore. Men can get vasectomies. These are all only in one lifetime, really, right? From, let's say, 1960 till now. So all of us have way more power and authority and control, the availability of abortion, the availability of the morning after pill. These resources have changed the family incredibly, right? And for the better, I would say, way for the better. And also the people are living longer. My grandfather lived to be 94, and just a generation or two before that, almost nobody lived to be 94, and he lived independently till he was about 90, right? So those are wonderful things. But what that means is you could have great grandma, grandma, mom, daughter, and the little baby, kind of theoretically all in one household, just because we live that long, right? Or you could have that same sequence of human lives. You could have daughter and little baby are living in China because she got a good job contract, and the next matriarchal person, the next person in the female line, is living in Winnipeg, and then one is living in Toronto, and grandma's in a great-great-grandma's in a nursing home in Bulgaria, right? So that's another thing that before I was born, before 1960, that was pretty infrequent, that you'd have that many generations alive on the planet at the same time, but theoretically living in very different places. So you have now people who can Skype, who can Zoom, Facebook, they can be on the phone. There's a commercial I was laughing at last night. In this commercial, three grandparents are in a park. Each of them has a cute dog, and two of the grandparents are taking pictures and making videos of their dog to send to their grandchildren, and the third grandparent says something like, "That's very expensive," and they teach her how to do it more cheaply. So here you have active grandparents out in the park doing their thing, making videos of their dog to send to their grandchildren. Right? Yeah. Again, you wouldn't have had that before 1960. No. Yeah, every day, one of the grandparents says, every day I send a picture of my dog. I send 3 pictures of my dog, one for each of my grandchildren. And it's cheap. In previous generations, if someone came from Syria to Canada, and grandma and great-grandma were still in Syria, before 1960, it would be very expensive to phone them all the time. You didn't have those other options of Skype or FaceTime. So the best you would have would be letter writing, and then you'd send your letters, which is a completely different way to maintain family relationship and love and connection. I have a story that I could tell you here about these changes. When I graduated from university with my PhD, one of my close friends also graduated, and she had a husband that she loved. And so again, the story, she had had a husband before with kids, and her husband had kids and a wife before. They got married, and they were in love and so on. But when she graduated with her PhD, she went to one province to go and work, and he stayed in Toronto. So what that meant was, because plane tickets were way more affordable than they would have been 100 years ago, the transport, she would buy tickets of like 12 and would go every long weekend or something. She'd go back to Toronto to see her husband. So how unlikely would that have been before 1960 that a wife, A, would get her PhD, B, in her 50s or late 40s, decide to go, even though she adored her husband and he adored her, that she's going to go get her own apartment and her own job in another province. I love you, sweetie. I'll phone you often. And they lived like that for, I think, 15 years or 18 years, and then she retired from her job and moved back to be with him. But how very innovative. At the time I thought, oh, maybe she doesn't love her husband as much as she says she loves her husband, right? But they phoned each other every night, they Skype, they can do all kinds of ways to still enrich their relationship. And because he respected her right to want to have a job of her dreams, and he still had his job of his dreams, even though they were in different provinces, they still were able to have intimacy, connection, kindness, love. Beautiful. Beautiful. It's a new world. It's a whole new world. I find that kind of story very exciting. Right? Women traditionally would have had to completely constrict themselves, and a husband would have been able to say to his wife, no, if you don't stay right here and make my supper and take care of my house, our marriage is over. But instead he was proud of her. That's very new age, very new millennium. Okay, so another thing I wanted to just say here, and we've got a whole video on toxic masculinity, but this comment on the bottom of page 10 and the top of page 11 is very, very, again, I think, pivotal to thinking about families. They're talking here about, in a way, the traditional norms of masculinity are fatal for families. The traditional, if we go extreme with it, the traditional male who emphasizes emotional distance, strives for hierarchical dominance in the family. He has a high degree of toughness. He's competitive. He avoids dependence on others. His aggression is his means of conflict resolution. The avoidance of closeness and affection with others. The suppressions of any feelings except anger. The avoidance of feminine behavior such as nurturing, tenderness, and expressions of vulnerability. So those are norms that, again, for maybe thousands of years in the dominant culture right now, the dominant, that was the way to be a normal man. If you were a normal man, you kept your emotional distance, you had a hierarchy, you were the boss of the family, all that kind of stuff. If you reflect upon it, the perfect male who displayed these perfectly male behaviors is actually the worst thing you can have in a family. Mm-hmm. Right? It's his way or the highway, and he's the boss of everything, and the only expression of any emotion he's ever going to show is aggression and violence. Yep. Other than that, he's got nothing to say to you. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. The Clint Eastwood, that kind of cowboy dictatorship. And so the way for a man to be, that for maybe thousands of years was the way for a man to be, is the worst thing a man can be now in terms of family. We talked earlier about boundaries, and sometimes you might meet with a couple, or a mom and daughter, or a dad and son, or whatever, and you work with them a little bit, but then you may realize one member of this family has to go somewhere and do some individual work before we can come back together as a collective and work in equality and kindness and so on. And very often right now, that's the story. You have a man who has been socialized, who has absorbed those old values and beliefs of he has to be in control of his kids, he has to be in control of his wife, he has to be the one who deals with all the money issues. He can't deal with it if his wife defies him. Right? Those kinds of dynamics. Often when we think, oh, we're going to do some family counseling here, really what you have to do is get him to go and reflect on all that stuff. Because it's not the whole family who has a problem, it's him who's stuck in that way. So reflect on that. There's someone, I'm trying to think of her name, Barbara Yaffe maybe. I went to a conference about family counseling, and this woman this was 15 years ago, she was saying that most of her career of family counseling had ended up being mother counseling because the father would refuse to come to counseling. And it was actually then she would be doing divorce counseling because as the woman came to realize, hey, I don't have to tolerate him slapping me. I don't have to tolerate him demanding the money always be spent the way he wishes it be spent, or those kind of old ways. So I remember laughing because she said, oh, I feel kind of like a fake being here as a famous person. She had written books and everything. I feel kind of like a fake being here as a family counselor because I've realized it's not family I'm counseling, it's mom. So just reflect on that the traditional male way is actually often the worst thing for family. And it's tough to get them to see that sometimes, because if that has been the main or only way, that they'll say, this is how my father did it, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, this is how my brother is, my cousin, my uncle. They have no role models or imagining of any other way, and encouraging them to just, hey, let it go. Let it go. It's going to be okay. You'll be fine. You'll be fine if your wife, a very common research has been on this too, that even to this day, many couples, if the wife makes double the money the husband makes, that can cause you'd think how wonderful, the family's got all this money coming in, this is fabulous, right?
Or somehow that has an effect on his ego.
His ego, his sexuality, his identity, his sense of shame, his self-remorse, his nervousness that she's going to leave him because she makes double the money he makes. There's still a lot of men among us who have these insecurities, maybe semi-conscious, but to me it's kind of astonishing. If I was in a partnership and my partner got a raise and they suddenly are making double the money I'm like, yeah, woohoo, let's go buy something wonderful at Winners. I would see it as a joyful thing. It wouldn't destroy my sense of self. It wouldn't make me feel ashamed in front of my friends. It'd be great.
Well, that, and like for women to hear like that there's a man making double your wage, that's not unheard of. That's very common, and for us to hear it, like if like you're like, well, I mean, I guess I can't speak for everyone, but like for me to hear it, I'm like, okay, cool. But like if you were to flip that and say that even to your friend, oh, I make double that, the look you're gonna get is gonna be a lot more surprised if you're a female than if you're a male.
So these beliefs are still out there, and we don't be shocked if you end up working with families and couples and start to realize that some of these things we think have been buried long ago of toxic masculinity, they're still out there. People maybe don't say them as loudly as they used to, but it's still out there. So here they've described there that toxic masculinity is destructive for families being their best selves, let's say. And here they've got, for good, mature relating for everybody in the family, here's some of the skills. And we were saying communication skills, empathy, respect, clear boundaries, and the constant ability to renegotiate those through the life cycle. So the daughter, when she's 13, will have certain boundaries and communications with mom, but when she's 15, but when she's 17, and when she's 19, let's say, her and mom are going to have to keep shifting those boundaries and energies, right? And that's wholesome. That's a beautiful thing. If mom's built all that in her daughter, yay, mom, right? My daughter doesn't need me anymore. She only phones me once a week. You've done a fabulous job. You're a success as a mom. You've done it, right? So here's some of the skills, and maybe we'll wrap up this one on the family. I just wanted to get a little bit of an intro. It's a sampler to encourage you to go buy the textbook, right? But these basic things are, whether you're in a course on family counseling or not, these are pretty standard ideas with any counseling that you're doing. So here's where we wish everybody to be. That to listen with an open heart without attacking or becoming defensive. To relate to each other with openness, curiosity, tolerance, empathy, and respect for people who are different from ourselves. To collaborate with others generously at work, at home, at play, and in community activities. To accept oneself and maintain one's own values and beliefs, even if others do not agree. To engage in nurturing, mentoring, and caring for others, and accepting their care in return. And the fifth is to consider other people in future generations when evaluating socio-political issues such as the environment and human rights. So that you could say in a concise little way, that little cluster of stuff: listen with an open heart, collaborate and be generous, accept my values might be different than my daughter's values, right? Mom and dad, if you've brought your children up right, they might have slightly different values and beliefs and attitudes.
They might be their own individual person. What a concept.
Exactly.
They're not your mini-me.
Exactly. And the same with a husband and wife. The husband doesn't have to have all the same opinions as the wife. It's a beautiful thing. Yay. Right?
And having different skill clusters doesn't necessarily mean that they're fundamentally different. That's the other thing, is I've heard that like, we can't go to counseling, or like we don't understand because like men and women are different.
Right, and research has definitely shown now that all humans, in terms of our brain capacity and our skill clusters, maybe 90% of all humans are all the same in terms of our genetic capacity for, being able to balance a checkbook, or going to the bank, or fixing a car, or changing a light bulb, or baking a cake. 90% of all humans are equally perfectly capable of doing all those everyday things,
and understanding how they've been socialized to develop those different ones, and that's the difference, not their biological or brain difference.
Exactly. And people may have certain magnetisms or natural. There would be people who are who have more of a talent towards creative stuff, and other people towards spatial stuff, and it's only a very slight variation, and it's not a variation based on gender. It's a variation just based on, as we were saying, the randomness of biology, right? Some people are born, they just love to decorate things and make them pretty, or organize things a certain way. Other people are just, let's just stay with the math, right? But it's just who you are, not based on gender, not based on your skin pigmentation, not based on anything except that's what happens. Nature is chaotic. It's just a thing. So I'll just wrap up with this one video on sort of an overview of family counseling ideas. I just want to restate those again, and I would suggest that those are good skills to bring anywhere. Listen with an open heart, relate with openness, curiosity, tolerance, empathy, kindness. Collaborate generously, accept your own values, beliefs, and attitudes, and recognize that all other humans are going to have their own values, attitudes, beliefs, and priorities. To engage in nurturing, mentoring, and caring for others. So that would often be seen as a cluster of behaviors that real men don't display, of being nurturing, mentoring, and caring. And to consider other people and future generations when looking at bigger issues. So all of us having a sense of we should all be caring for the world, others, kindness, donating to causes, saving the whales and the seals, and voting, and citizenship, being good citizens. So that cluster of behaviors, as we go through the whole textbook, we use that diagram that I talked about at the beginning, all the horizontal factors, or you could say macro factors, the family factors around life stage and appropriate individual functioning and so on. And then over here we have the individual person. So micro, meso, macro, and this diagram displays it a certain way. And then this list that we've repeated twice now about mature human engagement. In all ways, we want to enrich all of that with all the members of the family. So thank you for coming to this video today on Family 101 and the textbook, The Expanding Family Life Cycle. Thank you, Carlene and Tuba.
Thank you.